CBS Young and the Restless Spoilers. The cracks in Kyle Abbott's carefully constructed world were beginning to widen, and with each misstep he seemed less capable of repairing them. His relationship with Claire Newman had started as something bright and unexpected, a spark that promised renewal after years of tangled heartbreak with Summer Newman and the temptations that followed him into Audra Charles's orbit. Claire represented something pure, a second chance to find love without the baggage of betrayal or the weight of legacy expectations. Yet Kyle, true to the Abbott pattern, could not stop sabotaging the very thing he claimed to cherish. He lied when he should have been honest, pushed when he should have stepped back, and in doing so he began to unravel the fragile trust that Claire had offered him so generously. For Claire, the situation became intolerable not because she lacked feelings for Kyle but because she had hoped he could be the man who would finally treat her with respect and transparency. Instead, she found herself crushed under the weight of expectations she had never agreed to bear. Kyle's constant need to control, to define the terms of their future, left her suffocating. He told himself that his pressure came from love, from fear of losing her, but to Claire it felt like manipulation. Every time she asked for space, he responded with more intensity, more demands, and more explanations that never quite added up. And worst of all, the lies, each one a tiny fracture in their bond, accumulated until she began to wonder whether the man she thought she loved ever truly existed at all. Friends and family could see it plainly. They told Kyle to back away, to allow Claire to process everything on her own terms, to show her respect by letting her breathe. But Kyle, blinded by his own panic, doubled down instead. He believed that if he pressed harder, if he just convinced her with words or gestures, he could hold her. What he failed to see was that every push shoved her further away. What began as irritation evolved into distrust, and distrust hardened into the kind of disappointment that corrodes even the strongest connections. In his desperation, Kyle created the very outcome he feared most. He drove Claire into the arms of another man. That man was Holden Novak, whose quiet persistence and unexpected charm had begun to occupy Claire's thoughts. Holden was not Kyle, he was not burdened by family empires, decades of rivalry, or the weight of being Jack Abbott's son. He was simpler, freer, offering Claire something she had never known before, the chance to be seen without the shadows of power and legacy defining her. Holden's invitation to Los Angeles was not just about geography, it was about liberation. It was a promise that she could escape the suffocating drama of Genoa City, the lies that tangled her every conversation with Kyle, the suspicion that every tender moment was undercut by secrets. With Holden, the air felt lighter, the possibilities less poisoned by past mistakes. And when he told her he wanted her to come with him, it awakened something in Claire she had long buried, the desire to choose herself over loyalty to a man who had failed her too many times. Claire confided in her mother, admitting that Holden had become a presence in her life she could no longer ignore. She explained that his offer to take her to Los Angeles was tempting not because she wanted to hurt Kyle but because she could not continue living in a cycle of lies and apologies. Her mother listened, torn between protecting her daughter's heart and fearing that leaving Genoa City with Holden might create more complications than it solved. But for Claire, the choice was becoming inevitable. She had endured too much from Kyle, watched him lie, rationalize, and push her past her breaking point. If she stayed, she knew she would lose herself in the process. Kyle, of course, sensed the danger. He knew Holden was circling, offering the kind of escape that could rip Claire from him forever. Instead of adjusting, instead of learning from his mistakes, Kyle panicked further, tightening his grip. His jealousy simmered beneath the surface, his conversations with Claire taking on sharper tones as he tried to remind her of what they had, of the history they had started to build. But history meant little when the present was poisoned. Claire no longer trusted his words, no longer believed his promises, and every reassurance only reminded her of the lies that had come before. Kyle's greatest tragedy was that in trying to prove his devotion, he destroyed the very foundation upon which devotion is built, trust. The crossroads grew sharper with each passing day. Claire stood at the edge of a decision that would not only define her relationship with Kyle but also her identity within Genoa City. To end things with Kyle meant breaking the heart of a man she still loved, but to remain meant condemning herself to more disappointment and betrayal. Holden's offer became less a temptation and more a lifeline, a chance to step out of the storm and find clarity under a new sky. The irony was painful. Kyle's greatest fear of losing her was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and all he could do was watch as the consequences of his lies caught up with him. For those around them, the tension was palpable. Jack Abbott worried that his son was repeating the family curse, clinging so tightly to love that he strangled it. Diane Jenkins urged patience but privately wondered if Claire was too good-hearted to stay in a relationship already so fractured. Even Summer Newman, watching from afar, could not ignore the irony that her cousin was now enduring the same frustrations she herself had faced in her marriage to Kyle, the secrecy, the pressure, the emotional turbulence that made love feel like survival instead of joy. And through it all, Holden's shadow loomed larger, the promise of Los Angeles shimmering like an exit door from the chaos. Soap operas thrived on questions without answers, and this storyline was no different. Would Claire truly leave Kyle for Holden, boarding a plane that would take her far from the man who could not stop lying? Would Kyle finally face the truth about his own destructive patterns and find a way to win her back before it was too late? Or was this the end of a romance that had once seemed destined to redeem him? The only certainty was that the relationship between Kyle Abbott and Claire Newman stood on the brink of collapse, teetering between reconciliation and ruin, and whichever choice Claire made would change both of their lives forever. Claire Newman had never thought she would reach the day when Kyle Abbott's arms no longer felt like home, but the lies, the pressure, and the mounting disappointments had pushed her to a breaking point. She loved him once with the intensity of a first love, believing that he was the man who would restore her faith in both herself and in the possibility of a stable future. But as the months wore on, Kyle's inability to stop hiding truths, his reflexive need to control every outcome, and his stubborn refusal to give her space left her suffocating. He claimed he wanted to protect her, but what Claire felt was possession. It was as if her heart had become a cage, locked by someone who didn't trust her enough to let her breathe. And in the shadows of her unraveling relationship, Holden Novak emerged, patient, steady, and attentive in ways that Kyle no longer was. Holden represented everything Kyle wasn't. He didn't come from an empire weighed down by feuds, legacies, and grudges stretching back decades. He didn't carry the Abbott name like both a sword and a curse. He wasn't obsessed with proving himself to a family that could never decide whether to crown him or criticize him. Holden was simply himself, with no agenda but to see Claire as she was, vulnerable, searching, and yearning for something real. When Claire confessed that she wanted to go to Disneyland, of all places, it wasn't about roller coasters or cartoon castles. It was about reclaiming innocence, stepping into a space where joy wasn't transactional and love didn't come with ledgers. Holden agreed immediately, his easy smile reminding her how simple life could feel when you were with someone who listened without judgment. The idea of leaving Kyle behind to walk those crowded streets with Holden felt dangerous, yet liberating. It wasn't just a trip. It was a declaration that she was ready to experience life without Kyle by her side, perhaps for the first time since her world had been remade by her family's return. Kyle, meanwhile, felt the sting of betrayal even before Claire had left. Though she hadn't yet ended things formally, he knew she was slipping away, knew Holden's presence in her life was growing stronger. But instead of facing his mistakes, instead of acknowledging that his lies had poisoned the well, Kyle retreated into defensiveness. He told himself he didn't care about Audra Charles anymore, that she was a chapter closed long ago, yet his actions betrayed him. Every time they crossed paths, sparks flew, angry words, cutting barbs, lingering stares that spoke of unresolved desire. To anyone watching, it was obvious that the heat between them was still alive, perhaps even more potent because it was cloaked in denial. Kyle's insistence that Audra meant nothing clashed violently with the passion that lit his eyes whenever she was near, and Claire could see it. She knew that while he begged for her trust, part of his heart was still tangled in the thrill of his toxic chemistry with Audra. For Claire, the choice became clearer each day. She didn't want to hurt Kyle, she still carried love for him, love rooted in shared memories and the fragile hope of what they once dreamed of building together. But she also couldn't see a path forward. How many lies could she endure? How many times could she forgive only to be wounded again? Holden offered her something different, not perfection, not a promise of forever, but a chance to start fresh without the scars of betrayal. This was only her second romance, and it terrified her to step away from the safety of what she had known, but in her heart she recognized that clinging to Kyle meant clinging to pain. The irony was brutal. Kyle feared losing her, but every attempt he made to hold her closer only pushed her further away. When he tried to remind her of their history, she thought of his secrets. When he swore he had nothing left to hide, she remembered every time she had caught him twisting the truth. And when he swore Audra meant nothing, she couldn't erase the image of him sparring with her, his voice thick with the kind of passion no words could disguise. The result was inevitable. Claire began to imagine a future where Kyle was her past, and Holden was her present. Holden himself seemed overwhelmed by the force of his feelings. He wasn't playing games, wasn't chasing Claire for conquest. He wanted her with a kind of open adoration that caught her off guard. For a woman who had spent so much of her life surrounded by manipulation and agendas, Holden's sincerity was almost shocking. He looked at her as if she were more than her family name, more than her history, more than Kyle's ex. He saw her as someone worth choosing for who she was in the moment. Claire wondered if she could feel for him what he so clearly felt for her. Was it possible to fall as deeply into a second love as you did into the first? Or was Holden destined to be her rebound, a stepping stone on her way to healing? These questions haunted her as she stood on the edge of a decision. She wanted to believe in Holden's promise of safety and devotion, but her heart was cautious. What if she left Kyle only to discover that no one could ever love her with the intensity she had once shared with him? What if Holden's gentleness, his steadiness, lacked the fire she still secretly craved? Yet each time Kyle lied, each time he lost his temper with Audra or pushed Claire too hard, the doubts faded. Stability began to look better than fire. Peace began to look better than passion poisoned by mistrust. The ripple effects of her choice stretched beyond the three of them. Kyle's young son, already caught in the complicated web of his father's fractured love life, would inevitably feel the impact of Claire's departure. Claire had become a steady presence in the boy's life, and her leaving would open wounds that Kyle couldn't easily explain. Would the boy blame Claire for abandoning them? Or would he blame Kyle for driving her away? For a child, the truth was always messier, the losses harder to process. Kyle's fear of losing Claire wasn't only about love, it was about losing the image of stability he wanted to present to his son, an image already crumbling beneath the weight of his mistakes. And then there was Audra. Her presence lingered like smoke after a fire, intoxicating and toxic all at once. If Claire left, nothing would stop Kyle from slipping back into Audra's arms. They had always been drawn together by something dangerous, something neither of them could control. Perhaps this time it would solidify into something real, something they no longer denied. Or perhaps it would consume them both, leaving Kyle once again staring at ruins of his own making. Either way, Claire's exit would leave space for Audra to re-enter, and Kyle's inability to sever that tie once and for all suggested that he might not even fight it. As the days moved forward, the tension built. Claire's conversations with Holden grew longer, more intimate, filled with laughter and glimpses of a future she had not dared to imagine. Their planned trip to Disneyland became a symbol of everything she longed for, a journey into joy, away from lies, a chance to rediscover herself with someone who made her feel safe. Kyle, sensing the loss but powerless to stop it, oscillated between begging and lashing out, his contradictions only driving her further into Holden's orbit. Audra, watching from the sidelines, smiled knowingly, because she had always understood Kyle better than he understood himself. He was addicted to the very chaos he claimed to hate. In the end, the question was not whether Claire loved Kyle, because part of her always would, but whether love was enough to survive betrayal. She had given him chance after chance, forgiven him lie after lie, but her heart could no longer sustain the weight of disappointment. Holden was there, ready to give her what Kyle never could: love without conditions, trust without secrets, safety without cages. The decision loomed, and while she hadn't spoken the final words yet, in her heart Claire knew she was ready to walk away from her first love and step into the unknown with her second. Whether Holden could truly fill the space Kyle once occupied, only time would tell, but for the first time in months, Claire felt a flicker of hope. And in Genoa City, hope was often the most dangerous choice of all.